right, so here we are at week 4. And I haven't opened it up yet. I will once I'm done recording. But what I wanted to show you is what I opened up today that I just want you to keep in mind as we move through this course content. And you won't see these other weeks, but if you scroll to the bottom today, after today, you will see the project 0. So this accounts for 25% of your grade. You're going to build a fairly simple, straightforward website that will cover 20 topics that you're going to select from this class that we've gone over. And the good news is you're not writing content for each page. You're just going to use content you've already written for either lectures or hands-on or current topics. Okay. I will have you write a little bit of original content for that main page, right? But this, I just want to have you know this now, because as you're doing this, you could actually start already gleaning some of the topics that you might want to cover. And what you'll do is you'll end up creating 4 to 5 categories, so basically a menu organization. And we're going to use Bootstrap because we're going to move into sorry, Bootstrap in week 5. Okay, so just take a look at that now. We'll talk more about it as we go through. If you have questions, you can definitely ask me. Okay, so going back to week 4. So in week 4 here, I've moved the order a little different here. We're going to do the hands-on, then the lecture, and then here. And it's logical because I want you to start using from here on out the Git workflow. And in order to introduce that, right, it's a perfect thing to introduce because you can use this now in the CSS crash course. So same guy who recorded the other one, we're going to take his next one. I hope you enjoyed it. I think it's really well laid out. I think it's enough of an introduction that should then lead you logically into where we're going to go with Bootstrap, because really most 99% of Bootstrap is just really using CSS selectors to actually render websites responsive, render them the front end well designed, so that it's easy to do this stuff. So anyway, we'll get there as we can. So I'm going to go over the workflow. We'll lead into the discussion of what the work you need to do, and then I'll end with talking about UTF-8, your current topics here. Okay. So on the workflow, since we're going to do the CSS course, I'm actually going to now show you, and I'll move over to my editor. So we've talked about this, and by now you've cloned the repos, and this work will go in your private repo. Okay, and what I have here is I have my Visual Studio Code opened. I don't have a file open yet, and that's because what I want to do here is I want to actually go ahead and toggle into the terminal, just so that you can see that. There we go. Now I use the keyboard shortcuts because I like them. But remember, you can also, if you're on Windows, you could be using Git Bash here, whatever it is that you get to a command line, right? And last time I had you do so that you could see what version of Git you were using. And this tells you when you do this command, you are indeed running a command line that supports the Git commands. Okay. All right. So I'm in the editor here, and I'm going to create under lectures a new directory called CSS for our CSS tutorial. Okay. And there's 2 ways to do this. We could do this either at the command line, and I like actually knowing both ways because I think it's good. So I'm going to do a ls here. I'm going to change into lectures. I'm going to do ls again just to verify where I'm at. And basically I'm looking at this equivalent command line as I'm looking at the folder and file structure on this side, right? So this is the Explorer side of Visual Studio Code is the same. It's looking at the same content as this ls, this list of files here. Okay. So now what do I want to do here? I want to make mkdir, okay, and I want to call it CSS. Okay. Now what's kind of cool here is that you can immediately see this show up. Okay. And at this point, believe it or not, we actually haven't done any Git workflow yet. But I want to teach you, Git status. So right now there's nothing, right? So there's no changes because even though we created a directory, Git doesn't consider that a change to the files. It will note it, and when you do create files, it will know that. But for now, there's nothing in there. I just want you to see that. So now that we're in here, I'm going to come up here. Now we're in the directory, right? So I'm actually going to do it now the other way, that you can do it inside the editor, right? And it's just good to know both ways. So in here, we're actually going to create, let's first create a file. So when you create files, you can actually just use this right here, which is new file, but the key is make sure you're in the right directory. And how do you know you're in the right directory? It's highlighted. Again, depending on your color scheme that you're using here, that might look a little different. But I'm going to create a file. I'm going to call it index.html. Cool, right? So what you can do too, just so if you don't want to see that other stuff, you can drop that out. And then in here, I now have an index. And you want to create this file because this is the file you're going to need here in a minute when you start into the CSS crash course. I'm going to use a exclamation point tab in my editor, and what that does is it basically lays out that standard HTML code that you need for every page, right? And in here, then, we're going to end up linking to a CSS file, okay? But what we want to do here is before we create that CSS file, we're going to create another folder and it'll be a little weird, a little meta, as a CSS directory inside a CSS directory. Now that's just, it doesn't hurt, it's totally valid to do that. So in here, right, so now I've created, now by the way, if you've noticed here, I have some green. And so if I come down, and let me just do a clear and do git status, right, I can see now that I have in here, it shows me that in this CSS directory, I do have something new, right? But it's not tracked yet, right? So actually, let's do this. Rather than let's go ahead and do git add. And now I can actually type, I think I can type it from here. Let me see. Ah, very nice. I did the right command, but I wasn't in the right location. I needed to change to here. Let me clear this, do a git status again, and just get used to this git status, right? So now I could do git add index.html. Now, that actually added it into the Git local repository. It staged it, sorry. It added it, we call it staging it into there. So now let's do a git status. And so now we see a new file, right? So first we modify content, then we add that content, or what we call staging, and then we commit that content, and that's what I'll do now, and then we push that content, and that's what I'll do at the end. Okay, so now what I want to do, let me just clear this, right? So I'm going to do a git commit -m, and this is a message, right? I'm going to say adding new HTML, I'll do lowercase index HTML for CSS crash course. Now, be sure you type this the way I've shown it, git commit -m, right? And then the message, and then boom, that adds it now into my Git repository. Now, if you notice also, great thing about most editors, they will give you a visual hint showing you the version control status that you're at. So if I do git status now, right, I'm all up to date. It's like when we started. So this is great because now what I've done is I've done, you know, the workflow itself, right? So now I'm going to walk you through it again. And at the end, we're going to do a git push that actually pushes this code up to the site. But one thing I want to do before we get there is let's actually go ahead and create the next directory. So I'm going to go back to CSS. I'm going to create a new directory called CSS. And so I have a CSS directory, and I almost tried to make myself name it differently, but I decided, nah, it won't hurt, right? Now in here, I'm going to create a new file called style.css. Okay, and this is a very standard folder file directory structure you see when you look at web pages, web files. Okay, so now in here, I now have a new file, and notice my git status is reflecting visually, which I could do at the command line to see I have a new file in here. Okay, so what I could do here is actually I'm going to do this under my index file, and he walks you through this in the tutorial, but we're just doing it ahead of time to show you the Git flow. I'm going to come down here before the title. It doesn't really matter, you could put it anyway, is I'm going to do a link. Now this is where the editor tries to help you, tries to be a good productive partner. At the end, if I don't do anything else and I hit tab, it actually stamps out, gives me that signature of what a link would require. And in this case, I'm linking to that file called CSS, right? So what I'd want to do here is do CSS, because that denotes, and you can even see the editor helping you here, /style. And then, oh, I actually should have done that. And actually I think what I was trying to do is just arrow down, but I think what I have to do is just hit enter there. Okay. So when I hit enter, then it just completes it. So it's again helping me, right? All right, so over in your, let's do this. Let's just do a div. I'm going to do div again, tab. And you learn this more in Todd's class, but this is a style, a built-in utility called Emmet, and it allows you to quickly write HTML very nicely and quick. Of course, that's one of the benefits of it. Okay, so we don't have anything in here. We'll just do a hello world. He's going to have you do some more stuff. You'll do that as you get into it. Okay, but now we actually have several changes we've done here, right? And we'll go ahead and add all this stuff in a minute. But if you wanted to, right, just get used to this idea of Git status. So now we have a modified file, that index, and now we have a new file that's untracked, right, which our style CSS file. So I'm going to actually make sure that my style is connected to my index file, even though I actually have it linked. Right? Does the code reflect? And so to do that, I actually want to look at it as a website or as a rendered web page. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go up to view, and it's off the screen, but that's what I'm clicking on. I'm going to do command palette. And what you can do there is you can type open in browser, and I believe this now comes built into VS Code. It used to be you had to do a plugin, and maybe you still will. Maybe I'm forgetting I did a plugin here. But plugins are pretty cool and pretty easy to install, but I think you should see open in browser, and it also gives you a keyboard shortcut. But when I do that, then it renders my HTML right in here, which is awesome. So, but now I'm going to go back to my editor. I'm going to go back to CSS, and I'm going to type what we call a tag element level tag for CSS. I'm going to type background color just so you can see this, right? And then I'm going to do aqua, really horribly ugly color, and then we'll do a semicolon, right? So when I do this, which by the way, again, I have file autosave set up, automatically does that, okay? So then if I come over here and hit refresh, then I can see that that background is applied. And one of the things you can do is you can just have your screen split. One side has the editor, one side has the browser, so that you can just go through. Okay, so now I've walked you through the basic file structure that you're going to need for the CSS crash course. You're going to end up doing 40 minutes in this. And at the end, what you'll do is push your code. So where we've been doing the web interface, we're now going to move from doing it locally and pushing our code up. And this is part of the workflow. But let me go ahead, and before we get too far ahead of ourselves, let's add this stuff, right? So first, what do we need to do? We have git add. Sorry, I could do a git status. I did it a minute ago, right? So we have a new file. We have a modified file. So I could do git add, and I'm in the CSS directory, right? So if I just added that file and I did a git status, what I would see is that turns green, because it's like, okay, you've staged that file, you've added it into the staging area, and now I could change to the CSS directory here, right? And then I would do git add, and in this case style.css. Cool. So now git status. Awesome. So now I have those two files staged, so I'm ready to do a git commit -m, adding content and CSS, sorry, style. Okay, and so now I'm committing both of these into the local repo. Perfect. Okay, so again, your visual cue on your workflow happens over here. You're clean, and the way you can confirm that from the command line is everything. The branch is, oh, now we are ahead, this is good. So our origin. So this is where we're actually now, because this is actually telling us what's out on the web for us is different than what's local. And so we're ready to do the final step of this, which is a Git push. Okay, but I do want to say before I do Git push, because this happened in my CIT 93, is I think it's global. Is it global? Yeah. You may in the next, when we do the next command, get a message that you need to configure your global username and password. And so this is pretty simple. It actually gives you in the command how you do it. But if you just look here, if it gives you that message, right? All that means is your local system doesn't know your username and it doesn't know your email. And in order for you to do the next step, because the next step's actually going to log in, if you haven't already, into your Git and then push that code up to GitHub. And let me just show you, because we'll look at my GitHub to see how that flows up. So in 82, I'm looking at, and I could just search, it'd be a little easier probably. I'm looking again, we're working in the private repo, okay? So you can see right now that that directory is where it was before. I haven't pushed this code. Okay, so last step is I'm going to do a Git push. Now, there's actually other parameters you could throw here, but you don't really have to because the Git clone has set this up. And so if I just do enter here, boom, it actually is now resolving and pushing this code up. So if I actually come up here and do a refresh, right, I can see that CSS directory, I can see that index file and that CSS style sheet. Awesome. Okay, so this is great. So this now you have a whole new superpower now. A whole new superpower that is such a fundamental skill to doing development, because every shop you go to, I almost guarantee this, but maybe I could be 1% wrong, but almost everyone I've ever talked to that does professional development has some kind of version control, and most of them are using Git and GitHub. So this is such an important skill for you to acquire. All right, so let's go back over here. So just to confirm, so now you're ready. You're set up, you're ready to go. You only have to do the first 41 minutes of this course. Now, by the way, if you want, and I think I noticed that somebody did this, they went ahead and did the whole thing because they knew it was coming in part 2 and it was kind of like you're in it, so just go ahead and do it. And then the way you'll submit it is you'll give me a link to your and by the way, it's nice to give me this link because then it takes me right to the location where that I need this, okay? Or where I need to look at your code. All right, so what you will do is code along. Again, we're moving from writing about concepts to actually doing code here. And then you will, at that 41-minute point, even if you want to go over, and let me just say this, even if you want to do the whole thing, stop at the 41-minute point, do all your workflow, which as a matter of fact, I would actually do along the way just to get used to this process. And I think you'll just be better off with that. Because you again learn, and you probably see this if you've done this at all. There also is a built-in version control functionality in the editor, but I'm going to recommend again you don't do this yet. And the reason is you want to know these commands, you want to know how to write them. Okay. All right, so I think that should get you through this part. The last thing is a really great topic that is important to cover, which is the UTF-8 file encoding standard. So what I want you to do here is watch this. I think it's a relatively short, if I remember right. And I love Computer File. If you don't watch Computer File, he's awesome, and it's just he does some great content. But I watched this video, right, and then And then find terms you want to learn about, right? Learn more about or do some research. Again, you see me this kind of as a standard thing I do on these kinds of things. And I want to say this about your writing is make sure it's your writing. If I get a feeling as I read your stuff, it's just copied and paste, I'm going to reach out to you and say, hey, this feels like it's cut and paste. So don't put yourself in that position. Really own this content, right? 150 main posts, 2 replies, minimum of 75 words, because this is one of those, we're learning this stuff together, and really if the more time you spend to understand this and to integrate it into your own knowledge base, the better off you're going to be. Okay? All right, so that should get us through the first part of week 4. So now I'll start looking at the last part. The nice thing is here is we've already done this, so I actually get to do something else on this one. So I'll start looking at the Thursday next. Have a good one. See ya.